Hi guys, welcome back to our channel. Welcome to the Chapel Studio on a beautiful sunny day here in Auckland, up in the hills above Wenderholm. And today I want to talk to you a little bit about some of the cool gear that we've got here in the studio, and some of the stuff that I love to use, and some of the things that you might like to use if you ever come and visit here or work with us here at the Chapel. I guess the first thing, the heart of any studio, is the mixing console. And this mixing console here is a Neotech Mark II and an Elite Mark II to be precise. You'll know that I'm really crap with model numbers and stuff. I'm dyslexic as hell, so I forget things. But it's an Elite Mark II, take my word for that. And we bought it from Roundhead Studios, and this used to be Neil Finn's personal console, and he bought it from his brother Tim Finn. And it used to be in Sydney before it came to Auckland, and then we got our hands on it, and it hadn't been used for a little while. In fact, I think before we had it, the last record it worked on was the Golden Horse record, and when we got it, it needed a lot of work, so we spent about 200 hours on it, recapping it and getting it into a usable state to the condition it's in now, which is a beautiful console. Neotech are often referred to as the poor man's Neve. With good reason, because it's highly thought of as a very clean mixing console, and it is, and we absolutely adore it. But there's some other outboard analog gear here that I personally really love. I tend to mix using a lot of outboard equipment. You'll notice there are tape machines all around the place. I love recording to tape, and also using tape for effect. So, for example, I will often use a tape machine on drums, often as a split, so I'm getting a digital signal as well as my tape signal, which I can blend later, or I can prefer to use the tape sound, if I want, especially if I want something that sounds really vintage and kind of saturated. But in our rack over here, we've got some rather lovely toys. And let me take you to some of my personal favourites. First of all, we've got some Neve preamps. Now, why Neve? Well, because it sounds like Neve. Neve is renowned for its warmth that it brings. And so we've got 3 Neve preamp channels, and we've got 4 EQ channels. We've actually got 2 more of these. They'll be installed very soon. And then we've also got Germanium preamp. We've also got a couple of channels of art. We've got Focusrite as well. So basically, depending on the flavour that we want to get, we'll either use the console or these as preamps, depending on what we're tracking at the time, and what basically the style of music we're working on, what suits the vocal. Then we've got lots of outboard effects units. But probably this rack here is probably one of the most important, in as much as this is where all of our compression is. So we've got an LA2, a couple of LA4s. I will use LA4s or LA2s on, well, pretty much everything really, particularly vocals, guitars. We've got a Fatso here. The Fatso is a stereo compressor, which I tend to use on a drum bus. I just love what it does to drums. It's kind of in the name really. It makes everything fatter and warmer and punchier. We've got a Universal Audio 6176, soon to have 2 6176s actually. This particular preamp compressor I tend to use a lot with Troy Kingi. Pretty much all his vocals always go through a 6176 when I'm doing them. We've also got a 162, which I use predominantly on guitars. I've got a Joe Meek Twin Q, which is particularly wonderful on bass. And then moving down the rack, we've got an SSL The Bus Plus, which is a bus compressor, which I will often put on a master bus, or it might be on an instrument bus. Then we've got a couple of Aphex units. We've got a compeller, and we've also got an Aphex aural exciter, which is wonderful on vocals. In terms of effects that I really love, in terms of reverb, over here we've got an Ursa Major space station, an SST-282. To my knowledge, there's only 2 of these in the country. One of them is at Roundhead Studios, and we have the other. In fact, pretty much every single record that I've done with Troy Kingi, this has been the reverb unit that we've used on his vocal. I personally like to go into a project, particularly when mixing, with a overall reverb sound that we'll use on a record. And when I say a record, I don't just mean a single track, I mean an entire album, that sets a space in which that record lives. It's not necessarily so that I would use it on every single instrument, but I might use that same effect, that same reverb setting across the entire record on a vocal to a certain or a lesser extent blended into the mix. And that way, that record takes on a character which is specific to that record. So yeah, we have some fun. We get a sound that we like for that record, that's appropriate to that record, and then we will dial it in. So this particular effect unit is from the 1980s. It was very, very popular in the 80s as a go-to effect unit, and there's very few of them left in the world now, so I'm pretty stoked to have one of those. Below that we have a Space Echo RE201, which is a tape delay. And yeah, it's commonly found in lots of studios, but with good reason. It's wonderful. A Lexicon PCM92. We used to have a 96. Well, when I first bought it, it was a 96 because I liked the idea that it would work as a plug-in. With a PCM 96, it can appear in your DAW as a VST, but unfortunately it only works on Mac, and we moved from Mac to PC. Controversial, I know, but for us it works really well, and therefore we didn't need the 96, so we just went for the 92. Below that we've got Yamaha Rev 100, which is used occasionally, Roland SDE 330, and then we've got some Electrics fun stuff, which is more kind of strong flavour type stuff, which we use occasionally, DP2 and a Sony F7 as well. Over here we've got some more effects units. To be honest, these days most of the reverbs that we use are plugins, because let's be frank, they're so good. You don't really need to use outboard equipment for delays and reverbs. As I say, as apart from something that you can't get as a plugin, the Space Station SST-282. It's just got such a strong flavour. Why use outboard gear at all these days? Well, it just sounds better. It's not really any mystery that electronic components are going to produce a unique sound that's different to a plugin. Plugins are modelled on a specific piece of hardware, so it's always going to be consistently the same sound. And whereas, should I say, if you use analog gear, they all voice slightly differently. So for example, these LA4s, they look identical, but they sound slightly different. And that's pretty much true of all analog equipment. They tend to have been made in different batches, and therefore the components are slightly different, therefore they voice very subtly differently, and therefore have their own character. So when you're working with outboard gear, particularly vintage gear, you end up with colours that are unique to your collection of toys. And this particular collection of toys are very personal to me, because I've collected them over the years, because they're ones that I personally love to use. And any mix engineer will tell you, and any producer, that there are certain go-tos you end up using because you just like the colour of them, and also you kind of instantly know what they're going to do for your mix. So anyway, here's some of mine, and I love them, and pretty much every record you've ever heard me work on has got some flavour from these devices on it. As we've done the studio up, recently we basically created this much larger control room. Originally this room was really tiny. we've basically taken this wall out, extended it out. We've put the window in, control room window, so that we can actually see the artist, which has been obviously transformative. And the equipment we've got has grown. So we're trying to think about how we can make the studio as user-friendly for us, as warm an environment as it can possibly be for artists who are working here, a functional space that makes it work from a workflow perspective, but also just sounds fantastic. So that's basically why we've got this setup. But not only that, we've also been thinking about how we can make the space work really well for guests that want to book the studio, who want to come here. You don't have to have us working on your project. You might want to come with your own producer, your own engineer. So I'll pass over now to Brendan Zwan, who's a senior engineer here at the studio. He is responsible for pretty much all the maintenance of the equipment that's here, and he pretty much cabled everything up, so he knows it really, really well. And he'll talk a little bit about what we've done to make the place work really well for guest engineers and producers.
One of the things that became very important to us in the operation of our studio was the ability to enable guest producers to come in and use their own system with all of their plugins and all of their workflow set up, and not be locked into using our computer and have to export stems and import stems, or change over a whole lot of analog cables to their interfaces, which can take hours. It can waste half a day of valuable recording time. So to that end, we made a few important decisions. Firstly, we ditched our old interface system, which was an HD Omni, which is an HDX-based system. If you're not aware, that interfaces with a computer via a proprietary cable that you can't just hot swap to a new computer. It plugs into the PC via a PCMCIA card, which is something that is screwed into the computer. So it's no easy task to just switch that out in a moment. So we wanted to switch over to a USB-based interface, and the one that we chose was the Antelope Audio Orion 32. That is presented on a patch panel at the top of the rack. There is also what we call a dock. It's basically a glorified USB hub with HDMI outputs as well. And that is patched into the monitor controller, the touch screen for this monitor, and the HDMIs for the two monitors, mouse, keyboard. It's all ready just to be patched into a guest producer's computer with just two USB cables. And so in a moment, a guest producer can be up and running and have this whole world of analog gear available to them. The analog desk, the outboard gear, it couldn't really be simpler.
Studios are still important. We can all record at home, and that's fantastic. It's opened up the world to so many creative people to be able to be free to create incredible content. But there's still a place for studios, because it's about sometimes putting yourself in a creative environment away from home with people who are really knowledgeable and passionate about capturing a great recording, not just technically, but using the equipment that they've got to create different colours and textures in your music. And also it's really beneficial to work with people who have got a different perspective to your own in order to expand the possibilities of what your music can be. And that's what we love to do here at the Chapel. So see you next time. Thanks for watching. Ka kite.